the student senate right now. We've set a date for our annual Tiger Talk, 5K, going to be on Saturday, April 16th. This year we're going to kind of change it a little bit with, what Mrs. Smith has gone through and support her and donate half of our portion of the proceeds to her cause. We're also going to change our slogans and we run for your life and to help the lives of others. In the past we've done a color line, but we thought we would change it up this year and we're going to do a costume run. So we're dressing in Disney costumes or any anything with Halloween costumes, open to costume participation. So that's going to be April 16th. And then our blood drive will be on May 11th. As well. One more information. This past week, over spring break, the Cedar Orchestra traveled to the Bahamas on our spring break trip. So that was lots of fun. I was fortunate to go. I played viola, so we traveled down there. We performed on the ship, and then had lots of fun. So we visited the islands there. Still got to talk to the locals, and it was fun. Bargaining for souvenirs. It was a great experience. Good bonding time for everyone in the orchestra. So that was lots of fun. And then we were adjudicated. As part of the competition, they have other schools he goes through, and now through about June, and we get judged, and we got a 98 out of 100. So this is one of the highest score that our judge has ever given, and so far in this competition. So we're very happy with that, and we got lots of other sectional awards as well that we brought home. And then solo and ensemble festivals coming up for all three music disciplines on April 16th. And then I guess recapping sports, men's bowling team with state champions. We had phenomenal basketball as well, as we all know. Men's basketball coach the state winning semifinals, and then spring sports are all underway today. Tennis practice started from first day of practice, and tracks are underway. Yes. Our first day where it's classic first day of tennis practice is always the most conditioning. It's started right away with that. Usually it kind of wears off as the season goes on, but I'm excited for it. We have, I think, probably about 60 that in total, but about only like 50 or so. 50 going on the trip. Our trip was our orchestra was acquired from Wasilla, Alaska. So we got to meet them and get to know. We were exchanging things. We were talking about serotonin. So people would ask us, so you grow potatoes, right? So then we kind of educated each other on our states. So that's kind of nice to talk about perspectives and what research kind of perspectives. Okay. So back on March 8th, we opened bids for the project. As you can see, for the portable building itself, we received 2 bids, and that being from integrated modular solutions out of Cedar, Illinois, and satellite structures out of Phoenix, Minnesota. For the 24 months each, satellite structures as well. For the work that would be included to build the understructure, first facilities to the portable building, we received 3 bids. The role for that was completed construction on the wall roof. They being also the contractor for the industrial remodeling project that's going on in 2020 as well. So that was that. I would recommend taking a little of that. look at the premium cost versus the cost to purchase, by the time you have that capital or that building or that building or something else that building, and this comes to purchase the building. See if purchase price is 1.6789 to be able to purchase that outright and sell that to the neighbor and purchase at that time. No problems with them. The schedule during that project is during that project is extremely tight. All sorts of weather issues and rain and it's extremely rain. So we had to push them back and they were very accommodating. So the problem is if people knew that had not been constructed yet or were constructed for us to our specifications, there is one small storage that I could find you can walk into it and there is storing as well with that from the project primarily used for the concept. This unit will have some sanitation homeowners too as well. That was that's a little different from the new building that we have. Orchard Hill, but again we had and we found them to work quite well. They serve the function. They're not the solution that we want.
Hear a motion that we accept this recommendation.
I move to accept the bid from Satellite Shelters, Plymouth, Minnesota, to purchase one double portable classroom unit per the specifications and bid received for the amount of $146,789.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Joyce. Any questions? Any further questions?
And as a reminder to the board, we will be using statewide 1-cent sales and service tax funds to purchase this unit.
Okay. All in favor of accepting this bid, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And Deb, do you continue on that
Now we need a decision on the, we're making the recommendation is accept the low quote from Peters
Yep.
Construction for the foundations and utilities.
Ready for that?
And we had, again, 2 bids on that.
Three.
Three? 1, 2, 3. Got that together. And this was considerably better than we had projected.
Correct.
Mhm.
And that was, I mean, that's great.
That's great.
Why? I mean, I understand that they're probably got a project manager who can do both of them. That saves quite a bit of money. But
Mhm.
I mean, the other ones weren't
They weren't all that far off.
they weren't all that far off either. Is it where? Just from our learnings,
Labor.
where did we overestimate?
Um,
And it's a pleasant surprise. It's a surprise in the right direction. I'm just curious.
I think the concrete was a little lower than I had originally allowed for. Mechanical and electrical were both just slightly under, so just kind of across the board. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So do I hear a motion to accept the infrastructure for the...
I move to accept the bid from Peters Construction, Waterloo, Iowa, to furnish footing, utility connections, and access to the new Southdale portable classroom as per the specifications and bid received for the amount of $109,888.
And second?
Second.
Second by Joyce, thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor of accepting this bid, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Thanks.
Dan.
And Mr. Nefsker, would you continue with the school year budget proposal?
I'd be honored to. I wanted to stretch. It's that time of year again where the board needs to consider a budget for the upcoming school year. And so I'll have a little presentation. We'll sort of walk through this and how the school districts do budget is a little bit different than how city and county does budget. And you've heard a little bit about how their processes work over the last month. And so if you come right out of the Code of Iowa, you look at Chapter 257, that how we're funded is in an amount per pupil equal to the difference between the amount per pupil of foundation property tax of the district and the combined foundation base per pupil for the combined district cost, which is ever less. We'll kind of explain what that all means as we go through this. And what the Department of Ed and what the Iowa Legislature have put together is the aid and levy worksheet in the formula. Now this formula implements the foundation aid formula. It calculates the amount of spending authority, state aid, and property taxes that a school district can have. And by definition, that also means that also sets the school district's spending limit or maximum authority for that fiscal year. The foundation formula first determines the total spending authority, and that's based on our student enrollment. That's why student enrollment is so important to school districts across the state. And then it also then determines the state aid property tax combination that funds that amount. So we'll walk into this. There's 21 different sections in the aid and levy worksheet, and I think all of you received that in your board packet. It's about 7 or 8 sheets in length. And you can see these are the different sections. We talk about enrollment, per pupil costs, weighted enrollments, which includes the special education weighting, any sharing agreements, which Cedar Falls currently does not have any, at-risk students, and English second language students. Section 4 is our district cost calculations, regular program, other district costs, which include teacher salary supplement money, teacher professional development dollars, early childhood intervention, TLC dollars, which is new for this school district for the 2016-17 school year, and as well as ADA district cost calculations. It goes into the uniform levy. It determines the base. Then it calculates the state foundation aid and the additional dollar levy, which consists of the property tax replacement funds, which Cedar Falls and all school districts in the Iowa receive, and that actually comes from the statewide 1-cent sales tax pool. Property tax equity and relief funds, or better known as PETR, that's what comes from the statewide 1 cent sales tax pool. The property tax replacement payments, that comes allocated by the legislature. So I'm sorry, I got those two backwards. And then any utility replacement adjustments. And then you can see instructional support, instructional improvement program, of which Cedar Falls is not currently eligible, any additional levies, and then the summaries and other funds. So that's kind of what that all entails. As well as the last three, the voted PEPL and income surtax, of which this school district does not use any income surtax dollars and its funding sources and other funds. So all this is driven by student enrollment, and you can see historically by looking at the chart how our enrollment has increased over the last 10 years. Quite an increase. The red bar, of course, is Cedar Falls School students attending classes with us. The tan bar would be those students that are resident students that are going to another school district through open enrollment out. And in October 2010, October 2011, those were students that were Price Lab students before Price Lab ceased to operate. Another part of it in Section 3 is the special education. We've talked about that a lot. If you'll remember, we talked about that last fall when we do our end of year report, and you can see as a percentage of students how our special ed population has dipped. Now, part of that is because our total population is growing so quickly. So you got to kind of take that into consideration a little bit. But you can see how that trend as a total percentage of student enrollment has dipped. It's sort of leveled off for this year, for the last 2 years. And then we talk about allowable growth or supplemental state aid. And this bar graph gets a little confusing, but the red bar part of this is Cedar Falls piece of this, with the one exception being in fiscal 12. You'll see that it was almost at 7%, but that was the year that the Price Lab students were added on to our funding budget. And then, of course, then we in turn sent those dollars to the university as far as because they were considered open enrollment out students. So while it looked like we received 7% or almost nearly 7% supplemental state aid increase that year, we actually received 1% because our enrollment was fairly flat that year. And then you'll see the gray bar indicates what our actual what the actual state allowable growth was per year. So you can see we've kind of been all over the place, and of course for fiscal 17, we don't know what that number is going to be yet. They're still contemplating that. So one of the things we always do when we look at Cedar Falls, we compare ourselves with other school districts. And what I've done here is that Cedar Falls obviously is in yellow. We're the 17th largest school district in the state. And so I compared us to the next 5 school districts that have a greater enrollment than us, and then the next 5 that have a smaller enrollment than us. And the one thing that you'll notice is you have 3 of them in red. Now what that means is those 3 school districts are now into what's called the guarantee. If a school district, in a perfect world, if you have absolutely no change in enrollment from one year to the next, and they gave 1% supplement or 2% supplemental state aid, which is kind of what we're thinking was going to happen here in the end, they would get 2% money. Okay. But if they have a loss of student population and it equates to 1% or less, you're in the guarantee. So for 1 year you can guarantee up to 1% growth than what you had the previous year. If that happens 2 years in a row, then it's a guarantee based on 2 years ago, whatever that number was, or 3 years ago. And so you'll see by looking at this, Marshalltown's in the guarantee for next year because their enrollment dropped, but they get the full 1%. You'll see that Muscatine is in it for next year, but they get 95.95 because they're in it for more than one consecutive year. And Burlington, you can see they're only going to get 0.33 new money because they've been in it for more than one. They've had negative growth for more than 1 year. And of course, this is all assuming that we're going to have 2% supplemental state aid for next year. That's sort of the big unknown at this point. So what this is trying to show you is how do we sit as far as enrollment, and how do we sit as far as where we rank in the state of Iowa as far as size of school district. And the other thing we've done here is we've kind of give you that picture over a 3-year snapshot. You can see that Cedar Falls has had a certified enrollment increase of 193 students over 3 years, and you can see in comparisons to our colleagues across the state where they've been. Obviously, the 3 on the far left is Linn-Mar, and then the Des Moines Metro Schools, and then college communities right next to us. And Pleasant Valley, for those that don't know, is in the Quad Cities area. This bar chart shows the supplemental state aid dollars that they have received as an average over each year over the past 3 years. So you can see where Cedar Falls, we're right in the middle. You can see where we stand in comparison to everybody else. When we work through the aid levy worksheet, when we get to section 6, we need to talk about the district's assessed valuation. And of course, that assessed valuation is going to drive our tax rate. And as you can look at this, we've had a nice growth in tax assessed valuation since over the last 7 years. If you look at 2004, you'll see that that's a very small TIF amount. That was the year that a whole bunch of TIF dollars rolled off and then rolled into what I call the regular, and then the following year they rolled back. There was a timing sequence event that happened with the city of Cedar Falls that caused that TIF number to swing pretty wildly. And you'll see a little bit later as we go through this how that affected tax rate and some other things for us. And a little bit about TIF, you can see it started in 1958, and you can see the different things that it's established or intended to be used for. And the basic, it's set up so that there's a base evaluation established, and then the increased value in the TIF area is considered the incremental valuation, and the base goes to all the taxing authorities, and then the incremental goes to the TIF project, with some exceptions. And school districts fit into that definition of some exceptions. Because some of our funds, we do get the TIF incremental evaluation, and on some we don't. So I just sort of, the general fund we don't, but the instructional support levy we do. The management fund we don't, the PEPL levy we do. Debt service we also do. This shows our assessed valuation per student. This is sort of another benchmark point. You can see in fiscal 14, that was the year that there was the change in the TIF at the city level, and so we popped right up to state average or slightly above it. But then when that settled out back in fiscal 15, we dropped back where we're at. And of course, Cedar Falls is the red line, and the state average is the gold line. And obviously, I won't know what the state average for fiscal 17 is yet, so that's why you don't see that. This is you haven't seen this before, but I took the assessed valuation over the last few years and I broke it down by category. And I just for simplicity's sake, I broke it down into basically 4 categories. The red is residential. Right above it is ag, land, and buildings, and then commercial, industrial. And at the very top, the green is railroad utility. That's a pretty minor piece in this school district. But new for fiscal 17 is the multi-residential. Now, previous to that, multi-residential was a part of residential. It was considered a part of commercial industrial, I'm sorry. And now it's being slid into its own category, and it's going to be able to have, eventually, is very close to the same rollback that residential has. But the thing that I wanted to show out to this, if you look back at 2011-12 and you go to 2016-17, in Cedar Falls School District, you can sort of see a little bit of a shift of where the dollars are coming, where the dollars that the district will receive from a property tax perspective are coming from. Real quickly, we'll talk about assessed valuation per student. This compares us with our contingent neighbors. And you can see Cedar Falls is ranked pretty favorably, and there's the state averages on the far right. If you look at a 3-year average, again, with us, we're on the left. You can see that anomaly with the TIF from a couple of years ago, and you can see how we compare with our neighbors. And this is out of statewide perspective with the 5 schools larger and smaller than us. You can see Ames has a very, very high assessed valuation per student with all the residential and commercial all the commercial and industrial that they have in the community. In College, which is on the south side of Cedar Rapids, when you go down 380 and you get to about Highway 30, and you see all of the industrial that's in there, that's all in the College district, and that's why they're sitting a little bit better than we are. But otherwise, we stack up pretty well. And again, here's the 3-year comparison from assessed valuation per student perspective. So you take all this and you put it all together, and the formula comes up with how we determine what the combined district cost proportion is for next year. Now again, we're assuming and we're building our budget based on a 2% supplemental state aid increase. And so every school offers $5.40 per thousand. That's called the uniform levy. And in our case, that figures out to $1,520 per student, or about 23% of the total amount. The state comes back in and says, okay, we'll fill you up to the foundation aid amount, and then they will add on top of that the supplemental state aid property tax replacement payment, that started a couple years ago. Because it used to be when there was a allowable growth increase, that was a proportional split between property tax and state aid. A couple of years ago, the state of Iowa said, no, we'll pick all that up. Okay. So and we'll walk through that in a little bit. And then to top it off, to get our $6,582, it's another $849 per student that we need to come up with, or roughly 12.9%. So the state's picking up 64% of that combined district cost, and the district property tax portion has to come up with the rest. And then you can see this is a historical perspective of the district's combined district costs since 2010. And again, we're estimating a 2% increase for next year, or $6,582. Here's the mix. But what I just talked about, you can see for next year it's 64-36. The previous 2 years we were at a little over 63%, and again in 2014, that's the year that our assessed value per student popped up because the TIF went off. You can see that the property tax mix, state aid mix changed, because you had more property tax dollars to levy that 540 against, and that's what drove that up. So we go through, continue to work through the aid and levy worksheet. We get to section 8. There you can see the $5.40 that generates about $9,209,000. State aid will come in at just under $29 million, and that includes the teacher salary supplement, professional development, and the property tax replacement payment. And so then we come to how do we come up with the rest? Well, there you can see we need originally we need 6.4 million. Then you subtract off and you add the various items on the list, including dropout prevention. I've taken the dropout prevention out of this for right now. So we come up with a net property tax to fund that combined district cost of an additional 5.15 million in round numbers, or another $3 and roughly 2 cents. So you add those two up, and you come up with you needing a total of $15,128,000, or $8.87. And this is last year's, this current year's. You can see that for this year we're at $8.85, and you can see how our neighbors compare to the state average is $9.18. When you compare us against our 5 up, 5 down comparison, College and Ames are less than us, but if you'll go back to that other graph, remember their assessed valuation per student was higher. Okay, and so you can kind of see how the same dollar amount per kid, based on a different school district you're in, times what your assessed valuation per kid is. You look at the difference between Marshalltown and Cedar Falls to generate the same dollars for the same number of kids.
And Doug, I guess, just to confirm, so what you've all this that you've just described is the part which we really have zero
You
control
have
over.
zero control over it.
This is, and you've done a wonderful job laying out all the different components that add up to it,
But you have no control over
but
it.
we have no control over it. I mean, this rate, we can't say, hey, this rate is great, pat ourselves on the back because we did something wonderful, because we didn't, or it's too high and we should be ashamed because we can't do anything about it, right?
But what you can say, when you look at our rate of 865,
Right, 85.
or 885, you can say thank you to the city fathers and grandmothers of 10, 20, 30, and 40 years ago that had the vision and the wisdom to allow this community to be what it is today. Because without that vision and wisdom, you wouldn't have the assessed valuation per student that you have today, and that 885 would be a lot higher. So the next time you see a former council person, thank them. Because it's true. It really is. So getting back to what we're talking about, there's the split. You can see that the combined district cost is $14 and we'll generate 14.36 million, and then another 770,000 for the dropout, and then you can see the tax rate for that. Now, the other part of this is the instructional support levy. We always talk about that separately, and we account for our instructional support levy separately. But when we report to the Department of Ed, we have to. They consider it part of the general fund. And so there's a formula for how that works, and basically it's 10% of the district's regular program cost, which is the 3.3 million. Once upon a time, the state of Iowa gave school districts state aid in the instructional support levy, and so that's what that 23.63% of the total is. So you have to subtract that off, because once upon a time they actually gave us those dollars. That's so old that I don't even want to tell you how young I was when they were doing that. And so we come down to 2.539 million is the net property tax asking. There is no instructional support state aid. There is no actual instructional support state aid because the legislature eliminated that 2 years ago. And so our actual instructional support request will be $2,539,526, or roughly $1.29 per thousand. And you can see there's the amount we're going to receive about $100,000 more in funding in the instructional support levy. But you can see our tax rate is really pretty flat. Again, the formula drives all of this. And the voters of the community have approved this, and so it's, again, you're right, you really don't have much say in it. Now we do have something you do have some say in. Cash reserve. And there's two parts of the cash reserve levy. One is, we call it SBRC 1 and SBRC 2, but basically, SBRC 1 is anything that the Board of Ed has submitted to the School Budget Review Committee for approval. And in this school district, we requested $934,934 for increased enrollment. The board approved that back in November, as well as the $8,500 for our English language learners that were in the program more than 5 years, as well as our limited English proficient excess costs, which, remember, when the board approved that was new for us. We've never had that before. And that was back in October. And then our special education excess costs, we've had that in the past. We didn't have that at the end of fiscal 14, but we did at the end of fiscal 15, and that was the $675,000. So the total SBRC 1 request is just under $1.7 million. Now, that's an awful large sum of dollars to talk about, given the fact that we were basically a little over $500,000 a year ago. And so our recommendation is going to be to phase that amount in over 2 school years, And we're going to recommend that for next year that we actually ask for about another 592,000 over the 514,000 that we levied for this year. So that would be 1.1 million in round numbers. With the intent or the idea that when we do the fiscal 18 budget, we're going to ask for that other 592,000 to make up for the cash.
One of our challenges with that is the governor's vetoed last year of the 1.25 one-time funding. If that came to the district or approved both of the chambers of the legislature, that would have really offset that additional cash levy that we're asking for to offset some of those authority pieces that Doug just explained.
The second part of the cash reserve levy is what is commonly called in my world SBRC 2, and it's basically because they don't have enough cash to pay their bills, basically, and or other SBRC unusual requests. And occasionally the SBRC will receive requests. An example of that would be requesting to the SBRC because we're opening up a new elementary school and we would like to have some one-time authority for startup costs. That would be an example of that. And you can see we're not asking for anything. Now, a year from now, when I'm standing in front of you this time next year, you'll see that $500,000 in this SBRC 2 line. Because I can't ask for it in one because I can only ask for that for the year it was asked for. But I can ask for it in SBRC 2 for cash flow. So, our total request for cash flow levy is $1,106,730, and then we're basically going to defer another $592,000 in 1 year. That would give us a property tax rate of just under 65 cents for the cash reserve levy. And the reason why this is a big deal is I sort of wanted to show you this graph. Now, this shows our June 30th cash balance and our projections. You can see. And June 30th of 15, we had about $11.5 million, $11.4 million in the bank. Our projection at the end of June of this year is we're going to drop down to about $10.5 million. Now, if you follow the yellow line, this one here, you can see we're going to hold relatively steady for about 3 years, and then we'll start climbing back out of it. If we were to fund all of it at once, that would be the red line or the top line. We looked at a scenario where we would delay everything 1 year and then implement it, and that would be this third line here. I'll show you here. And if we just didn't do it at all, the board said, nope, we're not going to levy this, that's the bottom line. And you can see by the time we get out to June 30th of 2020, we'd have about $7 million in the bank on June 30th. Now you might think, $7 million in the bank on June 30th, that isn't so bad. But June 30th isn't really our problem date. It's August 31st. Because we've got salaries and benefits for all of our employees that we have to pay off in July and August, and we receive no revenue in July and August. So when you really look at those numbers, you can see under our proposal that we're going to sink down to about $3.5 million at the low point, and then we'll start slowly working our way up. But if we don't do anything in June 30 or August 31st of 19, we're going to basically not have hardly any cash left in the bank, and in June of 20 we will be negative. Now that doesn't mean we can't borrow for that. We can, and school districts do that. The school district I was at previously did that for a period of time before we got them out of it. But that costs money to borrow. And for those of you that have been on for the board for a while, you know that's where you go into the Iowa Schools Cash Anticipation Program. You're selling bonds. There's a cost of issuance. And the way the legislature has set up schools, I just can't walk down to Wells Fargo or pick your bank and say, I want a 30-day promissory so I can borrow some cash. We can't do it that way. We have to sell bonds. So it's just something for you to look at. That's why we're we believe what we're recommending is a prudent way of stepping into this without giving a shock to everybody in the community with that tax rate. Okay. The other thing that this will affect will be our solvency ratio, and of course our district goal is to have a solvency ratio of around 10. Now ISB will tell you can have a solvency ratio of 5, but we kind of think we need to be at a higher level. And by doing it the way our projections would be, our solvency ratio would drop right to about 10 by doing half of it for next year and then the other half the following year. And again, remember, solvency ratio really comes into play if we're ever going to be able to, if we're going to sell general obligation bonds or revenue bonds for future construction projects. That is one thing that they do look at. So if we start to look a little bit forward, now this projection is based on RSP and Associates enrollment increases. It assumes about a $675,000 annual special education deficit, and it assumes about a $90,000 ELL LEP deficit. Those are hard numbers for this year, so that's what we went with. So you can see where we were at for this year. We were at about 500,000. We would go up to about 1.1 million next year. Then it would climb to about 1.8 the following year, and then you can see it sort of trickles along from there. And it bounces up and down based upon the projected enrollment from year to year, as done by RSP. And this would show then the subsequent tax rate. We're at about 30 cents this year. We're requesting about 62 cents, I believe it is, or 63 cents for next year. That would throttle up close to $1 the year after. So you can see we're stair-stepping into it, and then we would sort of write it from there. The thing that's interesting about this is if you go back and look at our tax revenue, you can see this is historical, what we've done with cash reserves since 2010, and you can see what our request for 17, and then the black line, and then what we, assuming RSP's enrollment projection is accurate, what our request would be for 18. And here's a tax rate that we've had historically with our cash reserve levy, and you can see that tax rate for estimate for 18 is not really any different than what it was 3 years ago. And again, we're not going to levy for something if we don't need it, but we need it, in my opinion. So, based on all of this, there's the total dollars between combined district cost, dropout, and structural support and cash reserve. 18,775,000 round numbers, a tax rate of $10 and roughly 81 cents. There you can see the increase in dollars for 17 over this current year, and here you can see the tax rate, and you'll notice that the tax rate with all that combined together is almost identical to what it was 2 years ago. So one could say fiscal 16 was a little bit of an anomaly. Another piece of this whole thing is the commercial industrial replacement payment. I'm sure you guys are all just dying to hear about all this, but this is now part of it. And this is the calculation for how we get those dollars back. The state has said, as they implemented the rollback on that they would fund the difference back, or the loss of revenue because the assessment dropped, for 3 years. Next year, year 3. And so you can see we anticipate between the structural support levy and the general fund that we're going to be at about $380,000. That's our estimated payment for next year.
So that's 3 years. What happens in year 4?
They haven't funded it for year 4. We'll cross that bridge next year.
Unless there's another legislative act to change that.
If there may be a legislative act to continue funding it, but they've only guaranteed funding for 3 years. I could see a scenario where they would cap the dollars that the legislature's kind of good about that. They'll do something for a while and they'll just say, whatever that dollar amount is you had last year, we'll give you the same amount again next year. And then as things change, it just kind of gets spread out. So you might not get funded at 100%. You might get funded at pick your percentage. I don't know if they're going to do that or not, but I haven't heard very much about this in any talk this year about what they're going to do. But that doesn't surprise me. The problem really doesn't happen until next year. So, real quickly, the third piece of our puzzle, when we talk about revenue for our school, especially in the general fund or any Iowa public school, is state aid, property tax, and everything else, which is called miscellaneous income. And this is our miscellaneous income projected revenue for next year. The big one would be open enrollment at about $2.2 million. Special ed just under $500,000, and then you can see the rest of it. On a state aid amount, almost all of that is combined district cost, with the exception of the C&I replacement cost and the miscellaneous, other miscellaneous. We do get a few grants from the state every year, not a lot, and we're projecting about $235,000 for that for next year. And then federal money is always all considered miscellaneous income. The two big ones would be Title I, and these are basically this year's values because we have no idea what they're going to be yet. It's way too early in the game for the feds to tell us what our dollars are going to be. But we do project an increase in Medicaid. So we've got a great team working on that, and I think if you'll recall, Jill and Tracy talked about that a couple months ago. So you put this all together and you kind of want to figure out, well, how much is what piece? Well, you can see on a pie chart we're looking at about 39.75% local, about 56.8% is state, and about 3.5% federal, as far from the revenue side. That's the general fund. Now, real quickly, we'll go through the rest of them. The management fund, of course, is a board control fund, totally at the board's discretion whether you want to levy it or not. And we use it in this district for liability, property, auto, work comp insurance. And we do use it for property losses not covered by our deductibles. You can use it for that. We do not have any early severance in this school district, so we're obviously not using it for that. We're asking for $500,000 for next year, and that's a property tax rate of just over 29 cents. And then we'll get an additional roughly 9,300 in C&I replacement dollars. There you can see that the request is down from $530,000 for this year, and you can see the property tax amount drops from roughly 32 to 29 cents. Physical plant and equipment levy, this one's sort of a mixed bag. The board does have control over the first 33 cents of this. And the voters of the community have approved the $1.34, and that will next year is year 9 of that approval. So it ends June 30th, 2018. And you can see all the things that you can use it for. This district relies heavily on the physical plant and equipment levy for significant number of technology purchases, all our vehicle purchases. Every school bus that you see driving around town has been, a couple dollars have been used to pay for them. Support vehicles that we have, and repairs and improvements to our buildings are all coming real heavy out of the physical plant and equipment. So total between the voted and the regular is just under $3.3 million, and you can see it would be $1.67, which is the maximum that can be levied, and we would receive just under $100,000 in additional C&I replacement dollars for next year. There you can see the income streams for both the voted and the regular PEPL levy, as well as the tax rates. And so when we get to the end of all of this, you add everything up, the general fund, instructional support management, and the two PEPL levies, it's $571,394, or $12.76.973. How does that compare? We were at $12.44 this year, and so we'd be moving back up to $12.77, which again is basically identical to what it was for the 2014-2015 school year. If you want to know where the dollars go, for every dollar that you were to pay in property taxes, this sort of shows you where it goes. 63.6 cents goes to combined district cost. You can read the rest of it, and so you can kind of see where for every dollar that you pay in property taxes, where that would go for next year. And here's Jeff's point that he brought up so eloquently before. You really have control over 13.4% of that dollar. Because the rest of it is either driven by the formula, of which you have no control over, or it was voter approved. So this just shows a tax levy history by percentage for the last 5 years. There's the property tax rate comparison. You can see it's up 32.5 cents in round numbers. This is making an attempt to show where the dollar changes from a graphical perspective. And then there's the revenue comparison. And the big one, obviously, is the cash reserve. We're asking for a bit more on that for next year, and that's why the biggest part of the change, as you can see here. This is the second year in a row I've had to do this. Or was it the third? I don't remember. The legislature can't make their mind up. I'm sorry, I shouldn't squelch on them. They have a hard job to do. But we don't know yet what our funding is going to be for next year, and so assuming the 2% supplemental state aid, you can see the dollar amount. It's in yellow. There's the $22 million number. And you can see if it is 2.45, it doesn't change a whole lot. If it's 0, it drops 70,000. So it doesn't really change a whole lot from a property tax perspective. And you can see the property tax rate won't change very much either. If it's 2.45 instead of 2, it's less than a penny. So it's all calculated out. I'm just waiting for somebody to tell me what it is. So one of the other piece of all of this is how does this figure out to the individual residential homeowner? There's a thing in Iowa called rollback, and what they do is they take a look at the valuations of homes, and in Iowa Code 441.21 talks about how that's done. And it's the adjustment is determined by the Iowa Department of Revenue, and the adjustment is the same in all counties in the state. So Polk County doesn't have a different rollback than Blackhawk, as an example. And you can see since 2007, actually, the rollback has been steadily walking up the ladder. We were actually down to 44%, and then last year we were just under 56%. It actually dropped about 1/10 of 1% for next year. And so what that means is if you take, say you have 100,000, say your residential home or whatever piece of property you have is assessed, I'll just say $100,000. You take the $100,000 times the rollback, then times the tax rate. That's what it means in real simplistic sense. So what I've done with this graph is for this year, if you had a $100,000 home, times the rollback, times the tax rate, and then I took off the appropriate percentage of your homestead credit. So everybody gets the same homestead credit amount, and then just divided that by what percentage of the total bill is school district, city, county. That's where the $62 comes from. You can see that the difference on a $100,000 home under this request to the board would be an additional $16.76 for the year. For the year. And so here are the timelines that the board would set the public hearing for the budget tonight, and then we would meet on the 11th of April meeting to have the public hearing and make that adoption and approve that. The other thing that we need to do tonight is we need to amend our current year budget, and there's a couple of sections in Iowa Code that allow you to do that. 24.9 talks about school districts can change their certified budgets as long as they use funding from sources other than taxation, because you can't change the tax rate once it's set. And section Iowa Code 257.7 talks about the district may be able to amend its certified budget. So we've got a couple places in Iowa code where we can do that. It's not unusual for us to do this. We are recommending one change for this year, and that's to amend our expenditures in instruction. And I don't want to fly in the weeds and tell you how this all gets divided down by numbers, but it's our instruction piece, and that truly means regular and special ed instruction. It's not administrative, it's not business, it's not buildings and grounds, it's not construction, it's truly construction. We're asking for that amendment, and that is a direct result of the additional staff that we had to hire for this school year because of our increased enrollment, and for the additional technology that we had to purchase. Because when we purchased the Chromebooks that the kids use, that's charged to an instructional function code, even though it's paid for out of Fund 36 or the PEPAL fund. So it's based on the function code and not the fund. So that's our request for that. Again, we're using reserves that we've got on hand to cover that. We're not asking, we can't legally ask for any more taxation. We wouldn't anyway.
So roughly how many FTEs?
We had, how many did we have? 7?
I want to say a little, right around 7.
Yeah.
So our enrollment increased by
144.
144. If you do
Actually,
an average of 25 per classroom, that's your 6 to 7 plus
Correct.
technology.
And the other thing that we're doing on the technology side, we'll be coming to the board with this in the near future, is we like to buy, when we do our computer rotation, we like to have the board approve that. Probably happen here in May, and then we order them so that they arrive in June. So that gives IT all summer to get them whatever they got to do to get them ready so they can hand them to the kids when the kids come back in August. But by doing that, it would come out of this fiscal year, and not next fiscal year. We did that last summer. It made a world of difference for IT to be able to have that time. Instead of crunching everything in 4 weeks to do it, to have that another 4 weeks to get this all done. I mean, every kid that had a Chromebook or an iPad, they were refreshed or set up and everything, and they were ready for them first day of school. And then also last year was teacher staff refresh. Now that was spread out over the course of the school first semester, but we're looking at, you're looking at $500,000 worth of equipment. Now it all didn't come in before June 30th, but it helps with that. It helps with the timing. So
we've got enrollment projections obviously prepared. So the enrollment jump spike that we had this year kind of followed what our projection was. So I guess it's just a question on, so the delta as far as the increased budget amount, was that, how was that a surprise? Because we had forecasted, we just didn't budget, when we budgeted, we didn't expect that enrollment growth until the last minute?
We expected some of it, but there were some staff members that were hired in August because of a bigger jump in enrollment growth than we had originally anticipated. And we were ordering additional technology equipment to make sure that those kids had everything in July and August as well.
And I think the challenge is not all kids show up for one class, so you might have to add a teacher when you only have 10 more students in a grade level. So that's the challenge when you have those grade fluctuations or the enrollment fluctuations. And our in-seat count was closer to about 165 students last year. Certified enrollment was 144, but because of the weightings and how those calculations are factored, it's different from the number of student bodies in classrooms versus the actual certified enrollment number.
So it's a distribution issue. I mean, the distribution of those kids across classrooms caused us to exceed what we expected from a budget standpoint, because we had kids spilling over into.
You have an example would be we had a big pocket of second graders. I don't know if we did or not, but
Cedar
We
Heights.
didn't anticipate that. We thought that they would be more spread out. You know, and then the other thing with the technology equipment, there are funds in the PEPAL levy to cover that. That's not a problem. It's just the month you expend the funds becomes a problem because of the June 30th deadline. That's all. I mean, we had a large enough carryover in PEPAL to cover that extra 300,000 or 400,000 or whatever it was for that technology we needed. It's just that I didn't have the authority because we didn't. It's not a cash problem; it's an authority problem or a budget cap problem. And by you granting that adjustment or that amendment to that, that grants me the authority to do it.
And the year before, we had not increased our enrollment nearly that much. It was
No, the year before the enrollment had not.
relatively flat.
And, you know, we're starting to look at these jumps. It's going to start in this district. RSP's projections have been within 1% pretty consistently. I think there was one year they were off 4%. But if they continue on that track, this district is going to see some pretty significant bounces in enrollment. And we've been talking about that for quite a while now over the course of the next 8 to 10 years.
And what's really a challenge too, Jeff, is like right now at Southdale for next year, I'm already making projections. Tonight we have kindergarten roundup, so that'll help a little bit more. But of course, we don't always get as many kindergartners this time of year as we do in August. But we have 4 classes that are on that bubble, or 4 grade levels that are on a bubble of adding another section. And so a lot of times to be fiscally responsible too, we can't make those decisions now. Unfortunately, we have to wait till August to see if they come or not.
Yep.
And, you know, this is why the legislature has granted school districts the ability to be able to amend budgets. It's not unusual for a significant number of school districts to be doing just exactly what I'm asking tonight. They may be requesting to amend a lot more than just one item. I mean, I've come to this board in previous years and said, I think last year we amended non-instructional and other expenditures. Now, the other was because the Hansa project ran so darn late that wasn't anticipated. But non-instructional is all food service related. And so it can vary from year to year depending upon how things go and once you get into it.
So some additional questions.
Sure.
Just a confirmation. I'm sure you do this because you project what the assessed values are going to do as far as the budget, you know, applying that tax rate. So we're already assuming a step up in assessed values.
We're looking at 2% annual increase. Now, historically, the district's been doing a lot better than that. I mean, for next year, I think our assessed valuation is up 3% from this year.
So that's
we take a
difference.
pretty conservative number. The year before it was only 1 point something, and that was the lowest assessed valuation I had seen since I had been here. We'd had double-digit bounces in the assessed valuation for a while, and that was a little out of the usual. But we do project a 2%. That's probably a little conservative, and we worked with Gary Sinclair down with ISP and TMA, and 2%. He was very comfortable with that for projection for future growth.
Okay, so we're conservative there. Pre-K. How does pre-K fit into this? I didn't see any mention of the funding that we get for pre-K, and how does that?
Oh, that's considered miscellaneous income. It's a part of your aid levy, and pre-K is 100% funded from the state of Iowa. And let's see if I can go back to the far enough.
You only get half of the 6,500 whatever per student.
Okay. And it comes in the bucket that it comes in is the miscellaneous.
Yeah, I think I passed it.
Sorry, I would have asked it much earlier,
Oh, that's
but
fine.
I've found that you usually get to most of my questions. So
You know what? You may have to walk over and actually. Might be faster. Let me do it this way. Be faster to do it this way. That my thumb's getting sore.
While you're working on that, Andy, the average state per student, tax value per student. The reason we're lower is because of farmland. Is that the reason our average is lower than the state?
Well, our average has been slipping a little bit.
Okay.
Number one, we're growing enrollment.
Right,
For the
that's-
taxable valuation,
Okay.
but with the higher percentage of growth for student enrollment versus the overall growth of our economy, with our property valuations, we are growing faster than our property valuations.
There
Now,
it
that
is,
will
Jim.
hopefully catch up soon, as we look at what's happening this fiscal year, next fiscal year.
And that is considered miscellaneous.
Okay, so the
Like I
preschool,
said,
that's,
this screen is a combination of combined district cost and miscellaneous income, and the state preschool is considered miscellaneous income. And it's 100% state funded. There's no property tax dollars in any of that.
would it be possible to, I realize that the projected increase is minimal in the property tax, and our ability to control it is also limited. But 1244 to 1277, I mean, we're planning on a bond passing. Is it possible, is there a scenario where we could come up with using the levers that we can control, where we could make that neutral?
Well, again, that's where we talk about the cash flow piece of this. And I'm gonna
The solvency ratio.
And I mean, if that's the board's decision,
39.
I understand that, but I don't want to see a long-term detrimental effect to the
39.
school district. Am I going the right way?
No, 39.
39?
Go the other way.
Okay, go the other way then.
That's our challenge, is we looked at projections and what we felt would be comfortable, especially with our cash balances. When you look on the 39th slide with August 31st cash balances, if you split that out or defer that a year, we dip down into that right around $2 million on 2018, and then you start wondering if there's other potential cuts or reductions or funding's not made at the levels that we hope at the legislative level, we could dip further, and that kind of puts us as a district in a bind. And there's been districts this year that are making budget reductions based on their cash balances, and we don't want to be in that position to have to make reductions in
And
programs.
so then the other question I would ask you then is, let's make the assumption that the bond issue is successful. Let's just make that assumption. The community is going to agree to roughly $1.23 per thousand increase by that, and then by delaying this year, you're asking to put another whole dollar on top of that yet? That would be the direct result of that decision, where by stair-stepping it, you're minimizing that impact. I mean, my recommendation is stair-step it. But obviously, you 7 of you or 6 of you have the final authority. But that would be a direct result of that. And then if you said a year from now, well, the community gave us the $1.23, we don't want to implement that. Now take a real hard look at that bottom line on that graph, because that's what's going to happen. So,
Yeah, you're assuming that if you don't do it next year, you have to do the full after that. And I guess I'm just asking. I'm thinking of the two main levers we have are, one, the management fund, because of frankly some good work on your part for the insurance. We've managed to reduce our insurance premiums, so that's a plus. And of course, what the management fund, there's not a lot of there's not a lot to work
you'll
with.
notice that I'm throttling that back for next year as well.
Yeah. So I guess I'm just, if I'm just thinking from as we're asking the community to support us with this bond, which we want them to do, from our standpoint, what options do we have to try and minimize the increase? I mean, I think it's you've laid out, talking about fiscally conservative and all that, just from a, as we're asking the community to support us on this bond issue, what options we may have.
And I think,
Go ahead.
no, I think that's the challenge. When you look at this slide too, it goes back to that solvency ratio, and as Doug described, that is one of those metrics that they look at when they set bond ratings. So if all of a sudden we start slipping on our solvency ratio, we're actually going to have more of a payment for interest rates because our bond rating goes down. So you want to make sure that you maintain your cash balances. So if we delay that, that could actually hurt our solvency ratio, which could cause taxpayers more money in the future or less of the structures that we need to educate our students appropriately.
It's definitely a measurement that Moody's or Standard will use in determining what a rating will be before we go up for sale.
Yeah, no, and I certainly and appreciate that, and I'm not in a position to tell you at what point solvency drops our rating on it. I guess I'm just looking at that saying I think it's wonderful. We're being very conservative, and you've consistently always been very conservative and kept us out of trouble. Comparing that with ISAB's recommendation that this be at least 5%, we've set ourselves to a higher standard, which we're a growing district, so we have unexpected expenses that come along, and so I guess that's good. I'm just grappling with, how do we really want the community to support us on this bond issue, and I just asking the question.
And I really appreciate that, because I think Andy would tell you I wrestled with this for weeks, trying to figure out what was the right mix, what was the right step, and trying to see where we're going to be 3-4 years from now based on enrollment projections, and yet making sure that we're fiscally prudent. And yes, are there school districts that borrow cash? Yes, they do. But in my view, that's taking dollars directly away from kids to pay interest, because that has to come out of the general fund. It can't come out anyplace else. So you balance that. And then the other thing you have to remember is when you go into ICE cap and say I have to borrow $1 million or $2 million in cash flow, that affects your overall bonding capacity that a district can have against the constitutional debt limit. That's counted in that. So I don't know that we would ever be in a situation where that would become a problem, but if you can only borrow it a year and you're borrowing $2 million in cash flow, you just reduced your total capacity by $2 million. Now, I don't know if right now we don't have that problem. We've got $20-some million out in revenue bonds. We're not even remotely close to that limit. But could we be close to that limit if we build a new high school? Maybe. I don't know that. That limit is based on what your assessed valuation is, and as that grows, that expands your limit. But anytime you lease something, you go into ICE cap. If we lease the copier, that goes against your debt limit. And you'll notice we don't lease anything around here. And one of the reasons why we do is because it costs money. It costs more money than it does to pay for it. Cash is still king in my mind. So, but my recommendation is to stair-step it over 2 years. If the board wants to do something other than that, I certainly am sensitive to that property tax rate question.
And we appreciate the question. Sorry about that, because it's something that it's been wrestled with for a while now to try to figure out what that balance looks like. And one of the things, and it's on slide 62, you can see that yes, there's a slight bump with the levy rate, but the levy rate is the second lowest it's been in the last 8 years. So we're trying to make sure we're fiscally responsible, but also balancing so we don't put future boards, the district in the future in a difficult position.
Good question, Jeff. I thought it was going to be a little bigger than that, than the 33-cent projection. So I appreciate it. Anybody else have any other questions on the proposed budget?
And I hate to be able to push some of this off, but if we received the funding last year that we expected to receive, especially the vetoed funding portion, we would not see this increase.
That's a true statement. Yeah.
So you're saying lobby our legislatures?
Yes,
Okay.
Lobby.
because that one-time funding source would have offset the cash balances that we're looking at right now.
Again, something that seems out of our control.
At least we can talk to somebody.
That's right. That's in our control.
We would not see the 32 cents if we received that one-time funding. And let alone a higher amount than 1.25 supplemental state aid.
Doug, any questions?
No, good.
Further? Okay. Do I hear a motion that we set a public hearing then for the proposed budget?
I move that the Cedar Falls Board of Education direct the Secretary to publish the budget estimate and notice of public hearing as required by law in the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, and that the public hearing for the 2016-2017 proposed budget be held at 7 p.m. on Monday, April 11th, 2016, at the James L. Robertson Administrative Building at 1002 West 1st Street, Cedar Falls, Iowa, 50613. So we have the General Operating Fund. This is the 2016-17 estimated expenditures of $56,107,090. The estimated amount necessary to be raised by property taxation is $18,774,974. Student Activity Fund. This is the estimated expenditures is $1.1 million. The estimated amount necessary is $0. The Management Fund is $653,385. The estimated amount necessary is $500,000. The Fiduciary Funds is $3,000 for the estimated expenditures. The estimated amount necessary from the property tax is $0. Capital Funds, Capital Project Fund, which is the SAVE, is $7,942,357. The amount necessary for property tax is $0. The Physical Plant and Equipment Levy is $3,617,360. The amount necessary for property tax is $3,296,420. Debt service.
Could you say that again, please?
Sure. Physical plant, the
Just
dollar
the
figure,
dollar figure.
$3,296,420.
There was a zero missing.
Did I miss a zero? I'm sorry. That's not too bad. Debt service fund, $2 million. This is the estimated expenditure. Is $2,770,692. The estimated amount necessary is $0 for property tax raised. Nutrition fund is $2,605,824, and the estimated amount necessary is $0. That gives a total for the 2016-17 estimated expenditures of $74,799,708, and the estimated amount necessary to be raised by property taxation is $22,571,394.
Thank you, Susie. Is here a second to that?
Second.
Second. Thank you, Susie. Any further questions on the proposed motion?
So just for education, so looking back at your timeline, so we published this, and then April 11th, anybody wants to comment on this can come in and comment, and then we take the final vote on this April 15th. That's
That night.
That night.
oh,
We'll need
of the
to.
11th.
Yeah,
That night after.
Right.
Okay.
yeah,
And
we'll
so,
need to that
and
night.
so, could the board direct me to reduce the property tax rate at that, before the final motion at that time? Yes, you can.
You can't raise it.
You can't raise it from what we published, but you can tell me to lower it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Any other questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Let's move then one more time to the budget amendment for public hearing for the 2015-16 budget. Doug?
I move that the Cedar Falls Board of Education set 7 p.m. Monday, April 11th, 2016, at the James L. Robinson Administrative Building, 1002 West 1st Street, Cedar Falls, Iowa, as the time, date, and place to hold a public hearing to amend the current 2015-2016 school year estimated budget expenditures for instruction moving from $37,174,144 to $37,612,154 to add staffing and equipment due to increasing enrollment.
Thank you very much. And do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Susie. Thank you. Any other questions on this motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. We now have some custodial bids. Doug?
That's me again. Every year, we need to purchase custodial supplies, and on the list of items, I think it's in your board packet anyway.
Yes.
We purchase a lot of things from Martin Brothers Distributing, obviously because they're a local Cedar Falls vendor, very supportive of our school district. But yet at the same time, the items on the list are proprietary in nature, and or territorial, I guess maybe is a better way to describe it. They are the exclusive distributor for those items in Black Hawk and surrounding counties, and so we could not even request a second bid if we wanted to. And so because this dollar amount exceeds the board policy limits set by the board for what we can do without board approval, we're asking for the board to approve this proprietary bid from Martin Brothers for supplies for the upcoming 2016-17 school year.
You have before you the bids. Any questions?
So is this?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Could you explain to me again the idea of a proprietary bid?
Well, think of it this way.
Like I'm looking at foaming hand soap.
Yeah.
Why do we have to buy it from them?
Because it's in a specific dispenser, and the product is in the container that fits in this dispenser, and only that container will fit in that dispenser. And that's an example. The paper towel holders, as you've all seen them, and when you go into the restrooms, specific vendor supplies that dispenser, and it's only there.
We can only get it from them.
Because it's only their shape and size fits in it. So that's an example of it. We have solution stations in all of our buildings. So instead of buying a 5-gallon pail of disinfectant, say, it comes concentrated and it goes into a solution station, and then you push a button and it automatically mixes the appropriate amount of disinfectant or what detergent or whatever it might be with water. Again, because that's a proprietary thing in the fact that that manufacturer sells that unit. If we were to go out to bid and we were to get a different vendor, then we would be ripping out every paper towel dispenser, every soap dispenser, or every solutions station, those sorts of things in the district. And again, Martin's is right in town. If our team wasn't happy with the product and services we'd be getting from them, they'd be telling me. And we would be recommending something different.
Thanks, Doug.
Good question. Any other questions?
We bought the razor, so we have to find their blades.
That's another way to describe it. Yes, that's a very good way to describe
And I'm
it.
always glad to see that the soap expenses are higher than the toilet paper expenses.
So do I hear a motion to accept the custodial supplies proprietary bid?
So moved.
Thank you, Joyce. A second by Doug.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next we have the approval for the 2016-2017 school year calendar.
Yep, within your packet there is the proposed calendar, and we'll bring that up on the board real quick. We had the public hearing at the last meeting for input on the calendar. The anticipated start date would be August 25th as the first day of school. I believe this is the first time in least recent memory where both Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and then the Columbus School District will actually start on the same anticipated date next year, which would be August 25th. You can see the anticipated end date will be the May 31st, which would be a Wednesday, with the final teacher workday being June 1st. Snow days will be added on to the end, or inclement weather days will be added on to the end of the calendar, and depending on how many we have, that could change that end date, and that should be down at the bottom as you see listed. Spring break corresponds, as always, with the UNI spring break. You can see when we would have our winter break, as well as some of the other dates built in for either a professional development or other holidays built into the calendar. So we recommend approval of the calendar as presented, and believe it's a very good calendar, and know it will suit us well for next year. As everybody's well aware, there's no such thing as a perfect calendar that you have consensus on, so it's always an interesting process to go through and get feedback, because there's always very strong opinions either way.
Have you had a lot of comments?
Not many, no. In fact, I've had none.
Oh, okay.
The only comments I've had from people are typically parent-teacher conferences where they fall, and they like the fact that we've moved those up in the year just based on the feedback we've received. Always be nice, if possible, to kind of start midweek, which we are. But the way the calendar falls, it would be nice to move it up a few extra days, but then how the semesters fall and where then the breaks fall, it just didn't make sense. So this is based on the calendar days and the calendar cycle, it seems to be the best scenario.
Well, I think it's better that it's not in December anyway.
The conferences.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah.
So there are or are not snow days built in?
Not built in, they're all added to the end. We put that down at the bottom with the little sentence that just says days missed due to inclement weather will be made up on subsequent days at the end of the
Because
school
this
year.
year we had snow days.
We did not.
Oh, we did not as well?
No,
Okay.
we did not this year.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Do I hear a motion to accept this school calendar?
I move that the Cedar Falls Community School District Board of Education approve the 2016-2017 school year calendar as presented.
And a second?
Second.
Second by Susan, thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. So we had a unanimous approval of the school calendar. Okay, we got the superintendent's report, and we have in front of us a handout on the bond.
Yes. My hope was to kind of run through the bond presentation that we have been providing to multiple different groups and entities over the course of the last several weeks. I think Janelle might have sent an update earlier today that talked about several of the components that we've been working on and communication strategies we've been working on. The handout is actually an addendum that we have been providing and giving to, again, many groups, many individuals and entities that we have met with. So I'll just first go through that, if that's okay. First and foremost, we have the handout that we gave to all the board members at the last meeting. The second page actually comes from the city, and it really focuses on the fact that we are growing as a community. Up on the upper right, you'll see that the total for this fiscal year so far that has been added either through commercial or residential growth is about $100 million of commercial and residential growth for our community. For the same last year, at this month total, we had about $44 million. So we are growing, and that's very exciting. And you can see how that's broken down not only into single-family dwellings, but also then how it's broken out into other areas and categories. On the second page and the third page, it really goes through some of the economic development components. And we classify ourselves as an economic development driver. If you have good schools, you have good economies, you have good communities, and vice versa. And that's something we're very excited about. And you can see some of those components that are highlights for upcoming 2016, some of the major infrastructure projects. On the second page, you can see some of those developments that are being completed, as well as some of the anticipated 2016 starts and startups for expansion of commercial and a little bit of residential in there. Typically, at these presentations, I also give out a study that was done by one of the developers in the southwest section of town, and they talk about potentially by 2022-23, there could be anywhere from 600 to 650 elementary age students living in their housing developments, which would far exceed our enrollment growth projections that we have as a school district. So that's not necessarily included in this packet, but it certainly does paint a picture that our enrollment projections seem to be very much on target and on track. And so next page, you can see then just the number of residential units constructed, and so far this year we are actually one of the highest in history, and that continues to grow, which is exciting with the number of permits, and it doesn't show 2016, but the number of permits are exceeding where we've been the last several years, and that's exciting to be able to see the number of lots and developments for residential purposes grow in our community, really in multiple areas. Then the next page is a history, brief history of the last 11 years of our district. We've grown by over 850 students in the last 10, 11 years. We are on target to continue to grow, and that is a great challenge to have. However, we know, as Doug laid out very well, funding is always 1 year behind when it comes to enrollment growth. So when you grow 144 students in a year, you have to fund those 144 students with your cash balances, and then the following year try to recoup some of those funding sources. The next page, which the board has seen quite often in different components, is our future enrollment projection. RSP does a great job. They work with many growing districts across the Midwest, certainly in Iowa as well. They work with Waukee and Ankeny and College Community and Iowa City, and they have been very accurate with their enrollment projections, but they project over the next 10 years will grow approximately 1,100 students. And that has been an accurate projection as we have used them since 2008. And again, as Doug said, they've been extremely accurate. Then the next couple slides are just pictures, and they'll be on the PowerPoint that I'll go through very quickly, but it talks about our current reality, and we really focus on the fact that many people don't know that next year we will have 8 classrooms in portable trailers. So 8 classrooms in trailers next year. We have areas that have been repurposed to house students, to educate students that weren't designed as classroom spaces. Some of them designed as storage spaces, others designed as maybe meeting rooms or collaborative spaces. And those are now being repurposed to house students. And if you walk through some of our buildings, you will see certainly how overcrowded they are, but also some of the struggles that we are facing as a school system when we look at where students are being educated at. And then the last page again shows some of our students that come in and out of the trailers multiple times during the day, putting on coats and hats, putting on mittens and gloves, and certainly taking away educational time that we expect to be devoted for learning purposes, and takes that from those students and those staff members. Then the final couple slides are just some of the pictures of some of our classrooms, and certainly where you can see students are housed that currently or weren't intended to be purposed for that reason. So going into the PowerPoint, when we go out and talk to the community, or I go and give some presentations to the community, I really try to focus on what we're about as an educational institution, and our whole focus is collaboration. So our professional learning communities, it's ensuring every single student has success, and we classify that as student by student, skill by skill. So I really focus on our PLC, the fact that we are a district model professional learning community, only one of 3 in the state of Iowa, only one of 22 districts in the nation, and that certainly goes from coast to coast, east coast to west coast. You can see that this is a map of where that breaks down based on who has been designated as district model professional learning communities. Again, 3 in the state of Iowa and 22 across the nation. I then try to focus in on the fact that we not only pride ourselves on providing that collaborative venture, but also focusing on how to ensure all students are successful. We're building in more supports to ensure that our classrooms support our students that might be struggling learners, other students that have shown exceptional skill in other areas of higher learning. So we're trying to build more capacity to ensure all students learn at high levels. We also focus on the fact that education has changed dramatically over the course of the last 20 years, but certainly over the last 5 years as well, as we continue to focus on technology infusion, and ensuring all students have access to digital devices and creating a digital footprint, which is very, very important in this day and age. One of the things that many people don't know when we give these presentations are the number of devices we have throughout our district. That our kids have these devices in their hands, they take them home with them, they use them 24/7 in many, many instances. Our battery might be running out. So, what this culminates into is the fact that we have multiple metrics that we look at. But because of our collaborative focus, the fact that we have staff that are amazing, and the fact that we have very dedicated students and parents to support us, you'll see some of our strong metrics across the board. Our highest ACT composite that we've had in history, as far as we can go and find. And again, it's a testament to what we're doing to focus skill by skill, student by student. The fact that of our AP courses, which is a globally benchmarked not only curriculum but assessment, that close to 90% of our students taking the AP exams, once again, that are globally metric and benchmarked, receive a 3 or above, which is usually an indicative measure of those students receiving college credit. That's in comparison to about 65% of the state students and 61%, a little bit less than 61% of the global students. So we tie this into what does this mean for a bond referendum? And usually I start this off by asking people, remember when you were sitting in a classroom. Remember in seats and rows in your desks, and think about the students that were in front of you, behind you, to your right and to your left. And now think that our students speak over 30 languages that are sitting in our classrooms. We have students that might have a diverse background, that might be have some severe disabilities. We have students that have strong aptitudes, but also students that might be struggling with their comprehension and basic memorization and facts. All those students are sitting in our classrooms where 30 years ago they might not have been sitting in those very same classrooms. Facilities must keep up with the demands that we're putting on our students, as well as the expectations for high levels of learning and always focusing on excellence. So as we go through this, we try to talk through that this is very easy, as we're trying to explain, to understand with our bond referendum and the hope that we have that our community will support this with the 3 projects. Focused on our elementary, focused on adding capacity by building a new elementary, adding on to Orchard Hill and remodeling Orchard Hill, and adding on to North Cedar and remodeling North Cedar. It's going to focus on 2 critical issues, the overcrowding as well as the inequities, and we talk through the inequities as we've talked about as a board, and then what that property tax impact will be. We then go into the enrollment growth, which we just talked about, and the historical enrollment growth, the future enrollment growth, and talk through those aspects. And then, if I can get to the next slide, thank you, the overall cost and the fact that we are asking for a $32 million investment in our future with a $40 million cost, but again, we're working to save those funds. We don't necessarily have the $8 million in reserve sitting there right now. We are working towards that by making sure that we are saving those funds to offset that overall bond referendum cost. Going through our current reality with everybody, once again, the pictures that you saw and have seen, talking about the fact that we have multiple spaces that are utilized for multiple purposes to try to educate students, and the fact that we have some safety and security issues amongst some of our buildings as well when we look at how this is going to impact those components. Finally, we talk about the cost of portables. This will have to be amended because of the 3-year averages of the annual lease. We talk about the tax impact and the fact that our average assessed valuation home in Cedar Falls, so the average is $156,000 of assessed valuation for a home in Cedar Falls. It's going to be roughly about, it's going to be less than $9 a month for the average homeowner in Cedar Falls. We then talk about, again, the economic development pieces, and that's typically when I hand out the packet. We go through where the growth is occurring, what's happening across our community in the residential growth, we talk a lot about the mobility of families. Families are very willing to drive in this day and age. In fact, we have families that live in Cedar Falls, but they might drive to Cedar Rapids to work. Parents are very willing to drive, usually in that 35-mile, 40-mile radius, and they pick their homes based on the quality of education and the value that will be added to their family and certainly their children. And that's important for people to understand. We're a much more mobile society than we ever have been. And that education is so important for recruitment, retention, and expansion as we look at economic development and the importance of growing as a community. Then we go through the fact that the developer packet, and again, I did not hand out that this evening. I think everybody on the board has seen that, to talk about how fast some of these residential neighborhoods are growing and how many homes are being built across Cedar Falls. And then finally, we have not had a voter-approved bond referendum since 1976, 40 years. We have 9 buildings, and we've not had that investment in some of those buildings that we know we need to have. Then we talk about the additional information, those preliminary drawings, a tax calculator, and what, again, this is going to look like and be for an investment in the Cedar Falls Community School District. Typically, I end with just a brief story because I think it's important for people to understand. And I had a very memorable event happen to be when I was 18 years old. I remember sitting at my grandfather's table in a small town in southwest Iowa. He was a retired farmer, and he was on a fixed income. There was a bond referendum occurring in his small community. And if anybody knows where Boca, Iowa is, it's a small rural community in southwest Iowa, very poor community. And I remember at the time knowing everything about the world as an 18-year-old and assuming when I asked him the question, Grandpa, what do you think about the school bond? His answer would be, I'm not in support of it. I've given my money. I'm 70 years old, and it's past my time, it's somebody else's time. His response still sticks with me today, and his response to me was, Andy, when I went through school, I had great facilities. People gave to ensure that the quality of education I had was at the upper echelon with high expectations. It's my turn to provide that for the next generation. And that still sticks with me today, and that's why we certainly focus on this is an investment for the future, it's an investment for our kids, and it's also an investment into our community as a whole, because we see this as not only best for students, but best for community growth as we look. And then I open up for questions. So I wanted to give that to the board, and I'll open up to any questions that you might have with this presentation. Typically this takes about 35 to 40 minutes. I try to condense it down as much as possible because I know you know most of that information, or at least all of that information.
Comments, questions?
Janelle and I are working on getting the vote in the student union. I believe we had double the number of signatures we needed, and that was all UNI students.
It's a satellite voting site, which is going to be tremendous.
Good. Well, thank you for all you both have done for this. I mean, lots and lots of time. Thank you.
That's very well, a group effort.
Very well put together.
Yeah, it really is.
Any other questions?
A couple other components. April 25th, we'll have a Leader in Me and Character Education presentation that we will have before the board. So that will be the informational report that will be here April 25th. I think that's important, and certainly one of the board goals that we do have as well.
Any questions or comments from the board?
I have some things to pass out from River Hills. I visited River Hills 2 weeks ago now?
2 weeks ago, Wednesday.
2 weeks ago, school visit, right. And very interesting. Mike Lonning, right? Mike Lonning has these brochures he wanted me to pass out to the board. They're starting another campaign to update over there. I'd like maybe if we could have him come visit with the board even for 10 minutes sometime. It was very, very worthwhile going over there and learning what's going on in that school, and it's part of a district that I don't know that we know a lot about. So he was great. He really was very welcoming, very lots of information. Do you want these too? Or just-
You got enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If there's
I don't really
any
mind.
Any other board member comments?
So we have, the other thing was we have a World Language Committee meeting tomorrow.
Tomorrow night, I believe,
Tomorrow
yes.
night, is that right?
4:15? Yes.
4:15,
Yes.
just so everybody is aware of that. If anybody wants to participate.
Where, Jeff?
It's
Here.
right here.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm not sure where it is. But it'll be in this building. I've not seen this.
Yes, well, we were the first ones to get them. I think he had them printed just in time for us, so, yeah. And then one other thing is that the big robotics regional is Thursday, Friday, Saturday. There'll be 2 countries and 8 states here, 53 schools, 1,200 kids. We're taking over the entire dome and the Cloud Center for 3-4 solid days. That committee has just been working like crazy, and this is a big, big accomplishment for
First in
them.
the state of Iowa.
That's right. Huge.
This week, right?
That's
It
this
is.
week. It starts Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Everybody's welcome to come.
So we do not have a board meeting until after the bond vote.
We
Is
have,
that
the
correct?
next board meeting is April 11th, correct?
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
And we do have